I can see you saying it. Welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order, please?
Oh,
What do we got, Stacey?
yeah,
What do we got?
totally. Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah.
You want fries with that?
Would you like a drink with that?
Biggie
Oh,
size? Biggie size?
Right. And it was like right around the time they started with the whole combo. I can
Oh,
still
yeah.
tell you the cheeseburger combo was $2.99 with tax. It was $3.18. Like, bam! I didn't even have to be by the machine. I was like,
I love this. Welcome to Brainstoke. My name is Tom Telford here with Preston Niederhauser. Our guest today is Stacey Davies. What's cool about this today is that I am business partners with you, Stacey.
Yes.
So you are in the house with Brainstoke, but you're also here representing Levo and the incredible story that we're blessed to be with you and to hear your story and the implications of the story, not just on your personal life, but now in your role as a business owner of Levo, a mind care company who serves the mental health in the state of Utah. Welcome, Stacey.
thank you.
Stacey, as we got to know one another before we sat down, you started to share something with me, and I stopped you because I wanted it to come out in the podcast. I didn't want to hear it beforehand, but it got me thinking. You and your husband adopted 2 daughters.
Correct.
What is the most fun thing about adopting 2 daughters?
Different for me personally. For each one of my girls, their stories were a little different.
Okay.
The most exciting thing about Kaya's, my oldest daughter's, is she was born on a Sunday. We found out about her on a Monday. Everything was all, the business side of things was taken care of on a Tuesday. And we then had a baby.
You met her on a Wednesday?
We met with the birth mom on Monday night. We got to have a sneak peek at Kaya. She was born as a preemie at 28 weeks, and so she was only 3 pounds. So we got to go to the NICU and sneak a little look at her. And that was interesting. I'd never seen that tiny of a baby before. And
Wow.
It was, wow, is right.
How old was she again when you first met her?
She was a day old.
Day. So,
Yeah, so less than 24 hours.
and when did you first hold her?
I got to hold her on Wednesday for the first time.
Tell me about holding her for the first time.
Oh my gosh. It was so exciting and the scariest thing I have ever done.
Yeah.
Because they handed me this little tiny thing that's 3 pounds, 16 inches long. She was wrapped in 3 different blankets because she couldn't keep her body temperature up. So to pull her out of the isolette to let me hold her, she's in these. So I'm like, what if I drop the blankets? Like if she slides around in the blankets, because I wasn't really touching her.
Yeah.
And it was super scary, but oh my gosh, so great. And not the experience for most parents walking into the NICU. They've just had either hard pregnancies,
Yeah.
they've had traumatic birth experiences, babies are super sick in there, like all the things. And we would go storming in there like, we're here to see our baby.
Heck yeah.
Let's do this. Where's my girl? And I was like, can I feed her? And they're like, well, she's not hooked up to the feeding tube. And I'm like, that's okay. I got this. I've been watching. So I'd go and hook it all up and they'd be like, okay, I guess you can. And then they were like, well, she needs to have a bath so she can't be held while she eats. So I'd sit and watch her eat all ounce of food.
Yeah.
And then I would ask, okay, can I give her a bath? And they'd be like, because most parents have just gone through something so dramatic and so hard, and they were tired to boot, and the moms were not physically back to
On their feet.
100%, you know, like they were. So our experience was unique to us, and we were a little smiley.
Yeah,
like
cool.
a lot. And I know other parents were too. They had been through some stuff
Oh, yeah.
before. So our experience was very exciting and
Cool.
it was great.
Was that the same for the second as well?
The second, we found out that we had been chosen by the birth mom a month before she was born. So she was born only 3 weeks early. And so we thought we had 2 months to get ready. We only had a month. But, and then we got to be we were supposed to be in the delivery room. And my husband was supposed to cut the cord, which he didn't find out till we were actually there. And he was not okay.
Okay.
At all. He was so white that he's like, I can't do it. I'm like, you can do it and you will do it. Just be quiet and cut the cord. If you pass
I remember
out,
this
I'll
very
push you to
thing.
the
Am I
side.
being shamed into cutting this? Because I feel really sick to my stomach.
Yeah, I'm right there
Did you
with
have the same?
Totally.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
Oh, man. Yeah, and our birth mom, her mom was there, and she's like, Dan, I think you need to sit down. He's like, no, I'm good. And she's like, you need to sit down because I'm not picking you up. And I'm like, that's so funny. Me either. Sit down and just sit right here. It was cute. But she ended up having to have an emergency C-section. So neither of us got to be there, but I did get a hold her first.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
That's amazing.
yeah.
So 2 adoptive children.
Yep, 2 girls.
Amazing. We have not had on people talking about the adoption process, but we have a lot of friends who have, and what an emotional roller coaster that is.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not all fun, and it's not all, yay, you got a baby, go pick them up. Like, it's not that. We waited 10 years. For
I was going to
Kaya.
ask, 10 years on a list somewhere.
10 years just hanging out.
How many times did you call the agents and be like, am I still on the list?
I tried to be real patient, and I would call once a month, and then I just emotionally could not do well with, or I didn't do well with that. And so finally, Dan was like, I got this. And he would call every single week. And it wasn't a whole 10 months or 10 years waiting. Like, there was just lots of infertility and issues and just working through all of that. But it was 3.5 years of waiting once all the adoption process was finished. And we were now waiting. Weekly calls.
Yeah.
They didn't encourage that. I don't think they were.
It didn't bump you up the list, is what you're saying?
No.
Dan was persistent.
He
Got to
was
close the deal.
persistent, right?
Yeah.
He was a great salesman. I'll tell you what. Yeah.
That's
So,
amazing.
Yeah.
That emotion that you were feeling likely was part of the overall mental health story, I would imagine, as parents. Before parenthood, take us back in the beginning. If I remember right, you actually both share the alma mater, the Lancers. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Indeed.
That's right. And if I recall,
Yep.
Dart.
Dart. Correct.
That's
Correct.
what I thought. It's fine. We can still be friends.
We'll dive into that.
It's okay.
We'll dive into that. There's this chip on your shoulder, Stacey. I think about this, and we'll get to it. We'll get there.
Dan was a dart.
Oh boy, here we go. Yeah. Well, that is part of the story then. But take us back. Take us back to your childhood. What was childhood like? Your family. Tell us about them.
I am all things girls. I have only sisters. I have 3 sisters. Mom and dad. Dad decided to leave when I was in 4th grade and was out of the picture. So I was raised by a single mom. And my 3 sisters and I we did all things girls. And that's what I know. And we played sports and we did all the music, different things. And each of us have different things that we're good at. One thing that was really great, and I didn't ever think of it this way until I have my second daughter who struggles with learning disabilities, but school was always easy for me. I was built for the public school system, hands down. It just made sense to me.
Why do you say that? What is it about this system?
I learned
Sit quiet in your chair.
sit quiet in your chair, don't talk, don't be a problem. Here's what I want you to read. Here's what we need you to learn. Take the test. Next. That was me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't hard, and I enjoyed school. I could be a forever student, forever, if money wasn't involved with the learning.
Yeah.
So rules and structure, like that was good for you. You loved that.
Oh, yeah. If it's a rule, you follow it. If it's a straight line, you stay on it. If it's a box, you stay in it. I'm not real creative. I'm guessing because I don't think that way. I don't like messy.
How many speeding tickets do you have?
Maybe that's different.
Okay, that is different.
Remember when I said there was nothing off of it? Okay, I have a lot of speeding
Okay,
tickets.
so you do break some rules then.
Okay. You're right.
Okay, that's good.
But
That's
it's
okay.
fine.
It is fine.
It's fine
Totally.
because I pay them
Uh-huh.
and I try and do better.
Yep.
And I will tell you, I know certain places in Utah between here and St. George where not a lot of personality in the police department. Other areas have some pretty good sense of humor employees.
I love this.
We'll just put it that way.
Funny.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I do like to drive fast. I like to, but not crazy. Like I want to stay in the same lane and I just want to go fast. I want to get on a wave runner or a jet ski. I don't want to do crazy tricks, and I just want to go as fast as I can straight across the lake. Like
Efficiency.
Done.
Yes.
Just hurry up and get there.
Which makes
then-
sense. This all
Yeah.
makes sense now. Stacey, what's your role at Levo?
I am the director of clinic services.
And amazing at it. Because of this, systems, processes, everything in its place. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah, everything has its place. Everything has a reason, and
Yeah.
if you just step 1, 2, 3, I don't do well with step 0 to I think I'll just try 10 right now. Like I don't do well with that, and I have to breathe deep sometimes when it actually works better the other way, and then I can like, okay, well, why does it? And then I can think through the steps that get you there and make a new one that then starts with 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
So,
Stacey, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about your mother raising 4 daughters.
yep.
What are some of those memories like of your mom raising 4 daughters? Did you know it was hard? Did it seem normal? What was that like?
I didn't think it seemed hard at all. She could do everything, and everything she did worked. And she knew all the answers, and if it wasn't going to work, she figured out a way to make it work. And nobody was stronger than she was. And I didn't ever know. She'll tell us, oh, we were poor. And I'm like, we were? I never went without anything. And she's like, well, we had to work all together so we could save money so we could go on vacation. I'm like, oh, other people didn't do that? Like, I didn't realize, and by work together. So she had her job that she went to, and then she convinced the owner to hire us to clean. And so we would clean as a family, and we did that twice a week forever.
Cool.
And I just thought that was all fun and games, because then you save all the money in a milk jug, and then you go to Disneyland when it's full. Like that was, so I didn't know we were.
Yeah.
It was hard.
I
Yeah, it
guess,
didn't feel hard.
It didn't feel hard.
Yeah.
And she just found ways, like, I remember we would always go and clean. And then on Friday nights, there was the old Clearfield pool, and you could go for $1. And so we'd go swimming every Friday. And I'm like, most people don't get to do that. So
We're
we
good.
must be winning.
Yeah.
So, yeah, had no idea. Like,
Yeah.
but in listening to some, like, she's like, well, I had to pay for a house and a car, and it was really important to her to keep us in our house. And luckily, it was bought at a time when it was much lower house payments, and I did. We never moved. My mom didn't move until almost, 5.5 years ago. So,
Wow.
I mean, she had that goal and she made it work, and it worked.
I met your mom, Christmas candy making,
Yeah.
which is so great. Very sweet woman. What did she do for a living?
So she did all things accounting for a Goodyear shop. It was Linwood Service Center.
Right there on Fairfield.
Yeah.
How about that?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she knew the owner. He was in our neighborhood, and man, he was a good man.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is that cleaning job, is that when you go back, was that your first job, meaning working to earn money?
Yeah, we cleaned a tire shop.
And what age? What age was that?
So probably, I want to say like 5th, 6th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Through high school?
No.
Or-
No. I can't remember, honestly. I think she and my younger sisters continued to do it a little bit longer once I hit high school, because then I went and got my own job at McDonald's.
Are you the oldest of the 4 girls?
No, I'm a
You're the second? Okay.
Yeah. So
What's the line? What's the line from McDonald's that you remember the most?
I don't know.
I know I can see you saying it. Welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order, please?
Oh,
What do we got, Stacey?
yeah,
What do we got?
totally. Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah.
You want fries with that?
Would you like a drink with that?
Biggie
Oh, yeah.
size? Biggie size?
Right, and it was like right around the time they started with the whole combo. I can
Oh,
still
yeah.
tell you, the cheeseburger combo was $2.99 with tax. It was $3.18. Like, bam! I didn't even have to be by the machine. I was like,
I love this.
I worked the drive-through because that was much cooler than the counter. Actually, I really, really liked working there.
Yeah? What was your favorite part? Give us your favorite. Was it the apple turnover? Was it the fringe benefits of like you didn't have to spend $3.18 on that same combo?
Right?
Yeah.
It's the people I worked with.
Yeah.
We just had a good time, and there were all kinds. There were people from Hill Air Force Base that would come and finish whatever they were. I never asked what they did. They just would come and work a couple shifts here and there. And there were people that were my same age in high school. There were other single moms. There were older going to college. So it was a variety. It wasn't all just teenagers, but it was the people. They were fun. I enjoy people.
It seems like that work ethic from those years positioned you for amazing things, later on to come. And I'm interested to know, maybe as we dive into your adult story, how you think back on some of those lessons from McDonald's or cleaning or whatever it was, but how they served you. But as you look back in those years or teenage years, is there other things that stick out to you, that you can remember that I maybe you didn't think at the time that they were serving you, but they did now later on in life? Because it seems like the teen years are such key years.
Yeah. I, again, was a rule follower. Every now and then I would question why to my mom. Why do I have to be home at that time? That's so dumb. That makes no sense. It does now because, she had to go up and go to work the next day. That made no sense to me. I'm like, I don't care if you're awake or asleep. She wanted to know I was home.
Yeah.
Like some of those things like that. And I don't know that I could have understood that then. But one thing that I remember as a teenager is I did not want to get divorced. I did not want to go through what my mom went through. And I didn't want to go through, my mom didn't finish school. Like she graduated high school, but she didn't finish college. And so when she was going back to work, she's like, what do I have to lean on? I mean, she was really good. She could have been an accountant, should have been an accountant, thinks like an accountant, like just that's fun for her. And that's what she did for Linwood Service Center for a long time, was a lot of that stuff. But I two things. I am going to go to college and graduate because I don't ever want to be in that position that my mom, how she would describe that feeling that way. And I didn't like thinking I would have to rely on somebody else. And the other one was that I didn't want to get a divorce. My mom married. We are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was raised that way. I still am. And my mom married a Catholic. And so in my little girl brain, that's why she got divorced, is because they didn't see eye to eye. And it was so much more than that. But that was my perception at the time.
Sure.
So I knew I was going to marry somebody similar in faith, and they were going to be a returned missionary, and we were going to get married in the temple. And scouting was a big thing, so he had to be an Eagle Scout. I got issues with scouting. Did you like my eye roll? I'm just like, I can say this, I can say it. It's fine.
Do you know what's amazing is that we've been at this over a year, and you're the first person to open the door with issues on scouting. And Preston and I could possibly spend 3 hours with you.
We better not go down this
Should
road.
we commiserate, Stace?
Okay.
Yeah. So we're with you there.
Do I dare tell you I'm not an Eagle Scout? Are we okay?
I think that we are great.
Okay, cool.
Because I've got a brother-in-law who is not an Eagle Scout, should have been an Eagle Scout, didn't become a member until he was 16, didn't have great parental support in that area, and loves all things scouting, and he is fantastic and phenomenal and just all the things. And I have issues as why he's not an Eagle Scout, like all the things, and I have issues with anyway. There's a lot of moms out there who are Eagle Scouts. That's all I have to say.
Amen. Enough said. Mic drop. Enough said.
Seriously.
There are thousands upon, the other day I was with a guy who's really cool. Sorry for the sidebar, but he was describing to me that his 2 daughters were 2 of the first 5 girls in the U.S. to become Eagle Scouts.
I'll be done.
Because they can now become Eagle Scouts, which, is really cool. And in my head, I didn't have the heart to burst his bubble that I think that there's millions of female Eagle Scouts who should be sitting in the eagle's nests of the world and are not. Yet every court of honor, every mom knows that they earned that.
Yeah.
The end.
Okay.
Anyway, so that was
Yeah.
my whole focus.
Uh-huh.
College degree, and married in the temple, returned missionary, Eagle Scout,
Yeah.
and I did all of them.
Say more. Say more when you go back. So it seems like, you learned work ethic, incredible, but then there was this set of values that you prioritized that were important to you. I was raised, LDS as well. Definitely know, those same standards and guidelines of kind of shoot for these certain things. As you now think back, because you kind of said, and I did all of them, but the look on your face was, all of those standards or things that you shot for didn't necessarily mean that meant things were going to work out the way you had envisioned them, or maybe the way that, they were taught to you that they would work out. So, transition.
Okay.
Say more about that and what that led to in terms of those first steps, maybe, at the end of high school or getting into your adult life.
Yeah. So, and again, remember when I said you do this and then you do this? I had my whole life was planned, not day to day, but you do this and this and this and this. And I had it all planned. And if you do everything right, everything works according to that life plan.
Mm-hmm.
Remember also when I said I don't like messy? Well, life is very, very messy. Life does not work according to your plan, even if you do everything right. So I graduated from high school, and it's back in the day when the school age, so I actually graduated when I was 17, and went to the University of Utah and lived in the dorms the first year. And I had to have my mom sign all my paperwork because I was 17. So that was fun. Started that off just as a great big responsible kid. And it was awesome. And I loved all of it. And I loved school, and I loved the freedom, and I loved that nobody made me go to school. I didn't have to go to school. I didn't have to go to class. I didn't have to. And I still did it because that's what you do. But it was just fun.
You enjoyed the
knowing-
independence of
I
it.
loved it.
Yeah.
There were a few snow days where the bus ran right to the shopping centers. So there might have been a few snow days that may or may not have been real,
Yeah.
according to the school, but it's fine. I still graduated. It's all good.
Of
Go to
course.
class. So yeah, I loved that independence, and it was fun. Oh, again, rule follower. We had to wait till we were 12 to get our ears pierced. First thing I did when I turned 18. On my 18th birthday, I was living in the dorms, 18th birthday, took the bus because I didn't have a car, from the dorms down to, what was the name of the mall?
Crossroads,
There we go.
CCMI Center.
Got my ears pierced second time. Totally proud of it. Totally proud of it. Like my,
Yep.
bam, first big girl decision.
Yep.
And I was so, I don't know, that,
You are off plan.
yeah, I was a rebel. That's the extent of my rebelliousness right there. That was it. But I felt super rebellious because
Yeah.
my mom was a no way. Once and done. That's
Yeah.
it. So
How long how long did you hide that second ear piercing from your mom?
I called her right up.
You did?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I love
I told
this.
you I was
Guilty conscience.
super rebellious. I was like, look what I did. And she's like, okay. Like there was no mess, no fuss.
Did you
And
want more? Did you want her to react more
I
than that?
wanted something. I wanted to know I was just being so naughty. Like, there it is.
Yep.
Yep. There it is.
Follow all the rules.
Brilliant parenting. No reaction. She's not going to continue. Well done. Well
I'm
done.
telling you, the lady is amazing. Yeah.
So you're now home after your first year, saving money.
Saving money. And I went to work for FHP. That was like your very beginnings of like your HMO healthcare insurance. It was an insurance and clinics. And I went and worked in their medical records. And it was very fascinating. And it was kind of my first inkling like, I kind of love medical things. But not like be a nurse, be a doctor. I liked the administrative side of things. So that just kind of opened it. And so I drove and I would go to the U, and then I would drive to where I worked that was on 33rd South. And then I would drive home, and I did that every day, Monday through Friday. And then I would hang out with friends and people. And it was during that time that I met my husband through my sister and her group of friends. And so we just hung out on weekends, and
Yeah.
that
She was a younger sister
she was my
who
older
was
sister.
in a circle of friends with
Yeah.
him. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. He was just newly returned missionary, and I was.
He checked the boxes, it sounds like.
He was newly returned missionary. He was an Eagle Scout. Was looking for a wife to take to the temple. Like, what more? Like, he was going to church every Sunday. And I don't want to sound mocking because those are all really good things. So I really agree with all of those things. But for me, it did not turn out very clean. It didn't turn out in a nice square box like I had planned. So yeah, but that's when I met him, and we went to the same young adult ward, because why wouldn't you at 18, 19 years old? That's just awesome, and it was so much fun. We
In
had a good
Layton?
time. It was in Kaysville.
Oh, in Kaysville. Okay. And he grew up in Kaysville.
Well,
Yeah.
No. He actually was born in Penzance, England, lived in Cornwall, and he and his family, so his mom and his older sister and his younger brother, they were taught by some missionaries over in England, and then the missionary came back and married his mom. She was divorced at the time, and then they came over to the United States when Dan was, I can't remember if I think he was 9. So
Yeah.
then they lived in Clearfield, then they lived in Kaysville. And that was his high school years. He was in Kaysville.
Yeah.
And if you ask him, he's from England and he lived in Kaysville. That's it.
Those two.
Yep.
Yeah. So at a young group, single ward that you were attending, which for our listeners, if you're not LDS, ward is a congregation of LDS people in a geographic, area. So you're hanging out,
Yep.
enjoying the time.
Yep.
What did you first think? Yeah, this is my guy. I mean, did he ask you out, or was there some sort of?
He asked me out, and I actually turned him down because I thought it was a little bit tacky that he asked me in front of his ex-girlfriend. So I said, no, weird. And then he was persistent and did a little better the next time he asked me out. So
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we dated, and first serious boyfriend ever, because again, if you don't seriously date, then you don't get into trouble. Like all these different things that I really tried to follow the rules. Like I just tried and tried and tried. So
Yeah.
anyway, first serious boyfriend, and it was amazing and great. And we dated 6 months. Well, from start to marriage was 6 months, but I had known him 6 months prior just as a friend. And then we were married.
Yeah.
Yep, I was 19.
What were your memories of early marriage? What was it like to all of a sudden now share a home and responsibilities and bills, and just what was that like for you?
It was very interesting. I was going to school full time, and when you get married, you work full time, and you have to have insurance and all those things. So I had a full-time job, and I went to school full time, and so it was the very beginning was a lot of, hey, bye. Like there was a lot of crossing. He wasn't going to school at that time. And I kind of love his story of finding school. He struggled in going to school. And so he was older when he didn't do well, and he was not made for public school at all. Not in England, not in the US. Like he struggled big time with school, and it was hard for him. And he tried Weber State 3 different times, and it was just not his way of learning, and he didn't love it. But so at the time, I was finishing up school and working full time, and he was working. So it was just a lot of regular stuff.
Busy. That's
Yeah.
such a time of just getting
Yeah.
established,
Yeah.
going to school full time, working full time, trying to just survival mode.
Yeah. And to live with a boy was weird. Like I didn't grow up with a dad. I didn't.
Yeah.
And well, I do remember living with my dad when I was little. He, I'm pretty sure, had some OCD just in the way that we lived and how he had certain things that had, anyway, Dan was not that way. He was messy, and he didn't put things away, and he had certain ideas of who did what in our marriage, and he didn't have to clean up after himself, and he didn't make dinners, and he didn't wash dishes or do laundry, and He wasn't good at math, so he didn't do any of the finances. And I was like, okay, I don't know, maybe that's right. So that's what we did. So,
Yeah. So roles, each of the roles that,
yeah,
you both carried at the time weren't necessarily discussed or agreed upon. It was just what it is.
yep. And I didn't know that that should have been a discussion. That should be a discussion. And it should be a long discussion
Yeah.
that both can be happy with.
Do you credit that as you kind of think about those early years of marriage to you didn't necessarily see it modeled in your own home growing up? And so you didn't necessarily know the questions to ask
Yeah.
or what to do? And
Yeah.
how did maybe a short amount of time dating or engagement also lead to that? Like, do you know the person? Liza
Right.
and I joke often about, how well do you really know somebody, and should you before you get married? I don't know. The question's a really interesting one, but
They are. And I don't know, other than living with somebody before you're married, I don't know that there really is a way. I don't know. Maybe there is, and I don't know the way. I'm not saying go live with somebody before, because that's also not something that's part of my belief system. But I wonder, just what do you do if you don't know? Like, really and truly, I had my grandparents, my mom's mom and dad. Well, they're born in like 1917, like they grew up. There was very much a distinction of she jobs and he jobs. And I watched that, so I was like, okay, I guess that's what we do. Even though I'm working full time and going to school full time, I guess I'll wash your laundry now that it's 9:00 at night.
yeah.
So
Did you reach a point where you were like, maybe this isn't how it's supposed to be? Like maybe you're supposed to share a little bit in this. Do you recall that coming to that conclusion ever?
yeah, and I would try talking to him, and Dan was really good with words. He was a salesman. He was good at it. That was his job, and then he became a channel sales director, and he was good with his words, and he was amazing. He could out-talk me and talk circles around me, and I was just like, I don't even know. Okay, I think that makes sense, and I just agreed now to do laundry, dishes, and take out the trash, and it was like, what? I don't get it.
Yeah, we're laughing, but it's because we've all been there.
We have.
Right.
I mean, right? And just in terms of navigating,
Yeah.
roles and responsibilities. And what's interesting about what you just described, I think about my own self as a young married, husband. And as I look back, even on those early years, it's one thing to say, well, we didn't know each other. But in truth, at 21, when I got married, I didn't know me.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm still at 46 trying to get to know me, and so that's say more
true.
about that. Just
So true.
yeah, knowing yourselves. You're kind of growing up. 21
Yeah.
is still growing up.
Very much so. And Dan also grew up in a very abusive home. The stepdad that brought them over from England was not good or kind to them at all. He was violent. He was very inappropriate with Dan's older sister. And then Dan's mom and the stepdad, they ended up having 4 more kids together, and he was very inappropriate with his own daughters. And so it was kind of a messy home that just was not okay. So Dan didn't learn a lot in his growing up, and I made a lot of excuses for Dan because I had a lot of sympathy and a lot of empathy for him that he didn't know. He really didn't. And at 21, like you said, even with great role models, you have no clue who you are at 21, at 22.
Yeah.
The difference that I see with a lot of people now, I didn't then because I wasn't necessarily watching. I should have, but I wasn't watching other people, is that Dan didn't ever own his, oh, that wasn't nice to say. I will try and do better and do better. His was, oh, that wasn't nice to say. Well, you should get a better sense of humor. And it was like, oh, maybe I should laugh at myself a little more. That's always a good quality, to be able to laugh at yourself. So then I'd be like, okay, I can do that. And it's not okay. I don't care. You shouldn't be made fun of. And if it's in your own home or in public. And yes, you should learn to laugh at yourself, but not at when somebody else is laughing at you and at your expense. That is not okay.
When did you start recognizing that in terms of, was it a dating time frame? Was it as newlyweds? When did you start to recognize?
It took me a long time. And like I said, Dan was really good with his words, and Dan was knowledgeable. Like, he may have had a hard time learning in a school system, but he was very, very smart. And he knew a lot of the gospel, and he used the gospel as a weapon. And he would say or do something, and he would turn it so that it was, well, if he was mad, and he would yell and swear and call, like, I mean, it sounds so simplistic, like call names and humiliate and degrade me. And he would then come back and say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that. I know it's what I learned when I was growing up. I'm sorry. Just remember that Christ says to forgive and forget, and you need to move on. Don't hold it against me. Oh, okay, that's true. That's right. Okay, I can follow the rules.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, all right. And over, and people talk about physical abuse. So when somebody has a black eye, that's wrong. When somebody has a broken arm, that's wrong. I didn't know what verbal abuse was. I didn't experience that in my home. I grew up with a mom and sisters, and I had a great self-esteem. Even as a teenager, I did not struggle at all. I still compared myself. I was never tall enough. There was nothing I could ever do about that. Like, it was just, I had tall friends, and I was just never going to be there. But it wasn't a self-esteem issue. I didn't necessarily struggle with that. And so I grew up with being complimented, and I grew up with, we weren't allowed to call each other names, and we didn't. And if we did, my mom was nowhere around. And so it wasn't done often because she was very present. And so I did not know. And that's one of my biggest regrets is I didn't ask questions. I believed and listened to Dan. Dan was wonderful and an active member of the church, and I thought that was all you needed to be, and you were a good person. And it was a long time before I was like, I don't think I should feel this terrible all the time. The physical abuse didn't start until after our girls were both born. I also didn't know that when you're married, you can be sexually abused. And I did not know that. I didn't know that it was okay to say no when you're married. And I did not know that you can actually use the word rape when you're married. And just because your husband consents does not mean that you do. And just because he wants something doesn't make it okay and fine in the eyes of what is acceptable with your values. And what I would tell somebody now is that even if you're married, you can say no. You should both agree on what is going to be experienced between the two of you. And you never have to let your spouse hurt you in a way and allow somebody else to hurt you just because they say so. And I trusted that Dan knew what was okay. And then after things happen, he would say that it was my job to be okay with whatever he wanted, whether it was him or someone else. And it's not. And I never want anyone else to go through that, ever. They are important, and no is a full sentence, even when you're married. So lots of things can be considered abuse and domestic violence. And the grooming side of our relationship and my story with abuse, my entire 20s, Dan was grooming me. And for your listeners, can I
Of course.
read a definition of what grooming is?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know this, and it is talked about more now, but it's generally, they talk about it with like little kids, like grown predators will groom little children. It is still done even with older people, teenagers, early 20s. So grooming is the practice of preparing or training someone for a particular purpose or activity. And I mean, you can use that definition for anything, but in particular, when it talks about abuse, it is getting them used to this happens and then, oh, but it's okay, and let's do this, and let me buy you something, and let me do this, and we'll make it all good, and it was all fun. And Dan was so funny. He was so hilarious. All the time he was funny, unless he wasn't. And he was either funny or he was super angry. So there was lots of grooming in my 20s, and it wasn't until, so we had both of our girls during our 30s, and it got harder to make Dan the center of my universe when our girls came along, because little babies are kind of demanding, and rightfully so. They can't do anything for themselves, and that was my whole focus. I wanted to be a mom. That is my whole heart, is being a mom. And I love being a mom, and it is so hard, but I love it. And I love being a little kid mom. That is my happy place. So my 30s should have been so great, and they were, mom-wise. My girls, oh my gosh, they are amazing. But it was after that Dan started getting angrier and angrier, and if I wasn't quick enough to his needs, whatever they were, there were consequences, and lots of I'm in trouble, lots of I can't do that because I won't be able to be home, or I won't be able to get everything done. So once I graduated from college, I never worked in the field that I got my degree in, because that wouldn't have allowed him to do what he wanted. So I went and I wanted to be a long-term care administrator, and I wanted to move to Arizona. And there's lots of long-term care facilities there, and this back in the
Yeah.
late 90s. So anyway, so
Was
he
that even pre-children?
Mhm.
So you couldn't, in your relationship, it didn't work for you to be working outside the home, even without children?
I worked outside the home until 2001. No, 2000, October 2000. We'd been married for 6 years. I'd been graduated for just a little over a year. That was it.
You've shared a bit as you shared this story. Thanks, first of all. But you said, I didn't know. I didn't know. You've said that multiple times.
Mhm.
When did you know? When did you realize? And maybe it was a culmination of lots of
Right.
thinking back on it. But I'm
Yeah.
curious when you discovered.
As soon as it was physically violent, when there was physical violence, then it was like, oh my gosh, I know what this is. And then I would look up things, and it was like, what is verbal abuse? What is emotional abuse? What is mental abuse? What is manipulation? Because only terrible people manipulate other
Yeah.
people, and that's not a good thing. And so nobody good would do that, and they do.
What, as I've thought about how you had this plan,
Mhm.
and Dan fit into that plan, so everything was right. You were checking. I don't want to use this term, but you were checking the boxes. You were doing
I like to
everything,
check
every
boxes.
goal you had.
Yeah.
It was happening, but then it went sideways a little bit. And was that hard for you to accept, or did you kind of think, no, this is still okay? This is still. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at here? I guess
Things went sideways when all of a sudden couldn't have biological kids, and it was like, wait, what? No.
Yeah, that's the next step,
Right?
Yeah,
That's what you do. You get married, you have kids, you raise them, you retire, you travel the world. Like, that's duh.
Yeah, it's the plan.
And that didn't work. And it was an infertility issue with Dan. And that hit hard. And it hit hard. That is not what men are. Men create and make babies. They are masculine, and he struggled with that. And we could tell no one. We couldn't talk about it. We couldn't share anything about it. So it was this dark, don't you ever tell anyone about this. And if you do, blah, 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 all the consequences. It's like,
But it was known in your relationship that it was him who couldn't or had the capability for
yeah,
having children.
right. And so then he was the one who made the decision that he was finally okay with adoption. And that took about 6.5 years. And then everything was great. Like, he was still, like, again, during this time there was just all that up and down, and he was mean for a few days, and then he would be so apologetic, and then he would be really calm and fun. And, well, interestingly, I don't know if this is jumping around too much, but now we have our kids, and it's starting to get, now there's some physical violence going on, and it's like, okay, I'm looking into this, and then I'm running across things in my research, because I love to research things. I love to learn about things. So I love the internet. But I started learning about different mental health things. Well, Dan was not going to go and get help. He struggled and had a lot of mental health issues with depression, and he has some past trauma with his childhood, and he needed to work it out and refused because men don't do that. And that was his mentality. He was, you don't. You handle it and you move on and you never speak of it and it goes away. It does not, ever, until it's handled correctly. And then it still doesn't go away, but you are able to work with it and work through it. And you have coping skills and tools. And honestly, that is my first experience into mental health, is watching him suffer so much. And as I would look at depression, then I started reading words like bipolar. And Dan changed doctors so much, because every time something led to them starting to talk about bipolar, he was out of there, because real men do not have bipolar.
Yeah, that's
They're
weakness.
just weak if they do. Yep. And they are not weak. They need extra help. That's it. And that's okay. And Dan would not hear of it. And it just escalated and became worse and worse. And it's so dumb. Like, the first thing that I was like, it is downhill. There is no, Dan was an all or nothing, 0 to 100%. So if you liked a sports team, you liked a sports team. And by like, I mean love a sports team. He was always a BYU fan, always. And he came home from work one day and said, I'm now a Ute fan. I was the butt of every joke because I went to the U. I drank caffeine because I went to the U. Like, I was, no matter where we went, it was because, well, that's because she went to the U. Or Layton High, because he was a Davis Dart. Whatever. Dart. Sorry, Tom. Anyway.
Don't apologize. It's all good.
All the things. And he came home from work and he's like, I'm now a Ute fan. And I'm like, what? He had to throw away all of his blue clothes. None of them had BYU on it. And he went and spent thousands of dollars on University of Utah paraphernalia. All things red. Everything had to be red. From his skis and his ski boots to his golf club grips, his golf bag, his coat, his jacket, his shirt,
He's all
his
in.
shoes. He is all in. Like,
Yeah.
what?
So what did happen? I mean, was it?
I think Andrea and Sean and Manny and all of our wonderful providers at Label would have I think they call it mania. Like, I mean, it's not the first one, but it's the first one that I was like, this is weird. This is not like, and he was just nuts. Like, I don't know. Anyway, about the same time, he was seeing a doctor, and I went with him because he was not sure about how to talk about it, because he was like, I think my testosterone is low. What do I do? And I love all things medical. So I went with him, and he was talking about it, and the doctor's like, well, let's test it. So they did that, and it came back, and it was super, super low. And he's like, oh my gosh, yeah, you definitely need to be on testosterone. And I'm like, hang on. Which every doctor loves when the wife is like, yeah, but what I read on Dr. Google was this. So also, and this is not to like, I always feel like I'm betraying Dan, but I'm not, because I don't believe in secrets. Anyway, Dan also suffered with a genetic syndrome called Klinefelter syndrome, or XXY. So he had 2 X chromosomes and a Y chromosome, which is the cause of the infertility. Just mom or dad's genetic makeup did not drop an X. They both kept an X. but the dad also kept the Y, so he was male. He had all male organs internally and externally. He was nothing. It just causes different things, infertility being the biggest. Depression is another big thing that people struggle with. Anyway, so I'm like, okay, hold up, doctor. I know he's got low testosterone, but with Klinefelter's, is it really supposed to be that high? Because everything I've read on Dr. Google says, and he didn't appreciate it, which is fine. Like I said, he is the doctor, and he definitely knows more than I did. And he's like, no, it should be at this level. And I was like, okay, not bueno. He was horribly violent and so angry all the time. And when he finally got in to see an endocrinologist, the endocrinologist was, okay, you're not built to have testosterone levels at a normal range.
Yeah.
And so he took him back off of that, and I'm pretty sure something just snapped and he went straight downhill from there. Like, it was rough. And I don't know, anyway, he became something that, I don't know, he should have got some help. Like, he wouldn't even, like, he wasn't open to it. And he was big on secrets about not telling anyone because it was, to him, humiliating, and said he wasn't a real man, which is so not true. Like, anyway, so my 30s were dealing with a lot of that and trying to figure out how in the world do you navigate this now that he's decided to be not just verbally, not just mentally, but physically abusive, sexually abusive. He decided to, and he couldn't just say, I'm not going to church. Like, he was in the bishopric, and he served in multiple bishoprics, and it's amazing. Like, he has so many good qualities and so many positive things that he could have done with his life. But he went from, and it was quick. It wasn't just a slow, gradual decline. It was quick. He went from being a full active member to, I'm no longer a member, and I drink, and I am going to do whatever drugs I want to, but probably not too many, because I'd have to actually go and get them himself. He didn't want to go and do that. So then he decided it was fine to include others in our marriage. It was not okay. Then he just went and found that on his own and had girlfriends and prostitutes and just became more and more violent. And at this point, it clued in. I'm a great learner. Sometimes I'm a little slow because I loved him. I saw his abilities and his good, and he was so good until he wasn't. But then it was my job to forgive him and to help him. But I have since learned with a lot of therapy, it actually wasn't my job to help him. It was his job, and he wouldn't do it. And it was my job to protect myself and to protect my girls. And as soon as we could get out of that situation, we did. And that is 22 and a half years is how long it took. And so many times I can look back and say, that's when I should have left. Oh, that's when I should have left. Oh, that's when I should have left. And the one thing that I don't love is when people say, why did you stay? Because I loved him, and I just knew if I prayed hard enough, if I did all the right things, he was one day going to really mean, I'm sorry. Or he would really mean it when he was going to change. Okay, I will never, ever do that again, I promise. Like, I just knew it was going to be this time. And there's a lot of trauma bonding that happens in abusive relationships. And when it was safe, I took my girls and we left. And it still took me 9 months of going back and forth and back and forth. And okay, one more chance. Not one more chance. Okay, one more. Okay, no. Like, it still took that long. And that many times going, oh my gosh, 4, 5 times. Okay, well, that was a crappy weekend. I'm out of here again. Like, it was so bad.
You used a word there just a minute ago. I think you said trauma bonding. Describe that, what that means. And
Okay, so I actually look up this definition because when people ask me if they're really serious and want to know why I stayed and not why did you stay, you're kind of an idiot. Like, you can tell the difference in how somebody asks. So I always come back with this question or this. If you want to know, look up the term grooming and trauma bonding. Then come back and we can have a discussion with where you're on a little bit more understanding of what happens. So trauma bonding is attachment to an abused person. Attachment an abused person feels for their abuser, specifically in a relationship with a cyclical pattern of abuse. Typically occurs when the abused person begins to develop sympathy or affection for the abuser. And so it's super easy. So the cycle of abuse, it talks about the cyclical is, there's 4, there's the tension building, then there's the act of violence, which is verbal, mental, spiritual, financial, sexual, like all of them, not just you have a black eye, now you're abused. The third one is their reconciliation. It's the I'm sorry phase. And then the calm, which is where they're like, well, it was because I had a bad day at work, or well, if you wouldn't have said that, if my laundry would have been done, well, if you would have found my wallet sooner.
So the girls were 12. The oldest was 12 when you decided to move out.
Yep, 12 and 9.
What did they understand?
That I thought I had kept all this abuse. Dan was a phenomenal dad. So good. He was so fun. And he took us all kinds of places. Like, we traveled all over. He made great money. And he had a gazillion air miles and hotel, like, oh man, I'm still using his air miles. Let's just put it that way. But we did all kinds of fun things and he would buy them whatever they wanted. They could go to the store with him and end up with like Christmas in a shopping cart. Like, it was ridiculous and way over the top. But I thought I hid all of the abuse from them. I've since later found out little kids are so smart. And they knew that Dad was mean to Mom. Dad was starting to use our kids toward, like, as a defense, or he would manipulate them. Oh, Mom said, no, come sit by Dad. I'll let you do what you want to do. It's fine. Mom's just mean. So he was starting to do that with our girls. And my oldest daughter, that's 12, she doesn't like loud, confrontational things. And so she would always, I just thought they were having a good time playing downstairs. But she would take her little sister, and they would go downstairs a lot. And I just was like, oh, man, what a blessing. They're not going to hear this. I thought they were just going down to play. She's since told me, she goes, oh, no, we knew when Dad came home what kind of mood he was in, and we would go downstairs and play because they knew what was going to happen. And so the 12-year-old, she knew, yes, no, that it was probably better, but I don't know. And she didn't love how her dad was acting because, like I said, it just escalated. Like, he just not the same person at all. And my little 9-year-old, she was just like, great, when we go to Dad's, we get to buy even more stuff, and we eat out all the time, and it's just wonderful. And it was not. So they knew, but it was kind of a short amount of time from the time that all of this happened to the first time that he attempted to take his life. And that was 7 months after all of the split. And then it was like, where's Dad? Why aren't we with Dad? Why? Then it was more questions of, okay, both of them knew, okay, something's bigger happening here. So it was kind of a short time that they didn't have a lot, but that was just the first time that he attempted suicide. And he was in a psychiatric hospital, or the psychiatric part of the hospital, and he was there for 6 days. And it's kind of hard to run away when you're on a mandatory hold. And they diagnosed him with bipolar and borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And he was released after 6 days, and they had all these things, all this therapy, all of these different things set up to help him. And he didn't go to one of them.
Did you feel after he attempted and he was diagnosed, what did you feel? Like, did you feel like I should have given him another chance? I'm not saying that's right, but I wondered if you experienced that feeling, or was there guilt that you're like, I've now left? I'm curious how you processed all of that.
I didn't work hard enough.
That's what you felt?
I didn't fix him. I couldn't fix him. Something was wrong with me because I couldn't fix him. And it was my fault. I should have tried harder, and I should have.
Is this him speaking to you, or is this just what you're thinking?
This is what I'm hearing in my head.
Okay.
It is him speaking to me, and I've since learned that. Because if there was a problem, it was always my fault, because he didn't accept responsibility for a mistake or problems that occurred. It was something I didn't do correctly, or his work's fault, or the church's fault, or the neighbor's fault. Like, I don't know of anything that he ever took personal, like, I made that mistake. Man, that sucks. I have got to fix this or correct it, or I am so sorry. Like, that did not happen in a legit way. He said the words, I'm sorry, all the time. I am sorry. I really struggle with, because it doesn't mean a lot if there's nothing behind it in action. So I heard all of that in my head. I told myself that in my head, like, man, a few more months, what would that have hurt you? Like, actually, it would have physically hurt a lot. It would have hurt so many parts of me, like all of it.
So you still believed all of those things that you were hearing in your head at that time?
At that time,
Yeah.
yes. And when he was released from the hospital, he went right back to what he was doing. And at that was in July. And in between July and September, he would tell me about multiple attempts. And during that time, I was seeing an amazing therapist. And I had been seeing him for a while. And I would ask him, like, he is saying these things. And he's like, is that your responsibility? And it's like, yes, no, I don't know. I had no idea what was mine to own. I had no idea what was truly my responsibility because I thought everything was. And I learned a lot about manipulation during that time because unfortunately suicide is a great manipulator. And there was a lot of that in our home after he would feel really bad about doing something and he would use that and he would threaten it and nobody wants that. And so I caved to a lot of different things because I didn't want him to die. I didn't want him to kill himself. And anyway, so from July to September, there were 4 different attempts that were used for manipulation because he didn't really mean to leave our marriage and our family. He just meant to leave so that I would go back to how I used to be. It was supposed to, and I was taking it further, and I was done, and I was out, and I wasn't going to go back. And on September 19th, Dan died by suicide. And you can't come back from that. He can't. And now my girls and I, we pick up those pieces and we add that to we do not keep it a secret. If you want to ask me how he died, you can ask me, and I will tell you. And we don't allow manipulation through suicide. It's kind of a trendy thing in schools to say, oh, man, if I did that, I'd go kill myself. Oh, man, you are totally worthless. You should just go die. I wish you were dead. Like, kids say that, and it's like, oh, I was just joking. Well, it's not a joke at our house, and I will tell you, if you're friends with my second, she is very literal, and she takes you at your word. So if you say that around her, she will report to Safe Utah app, or to a school administrator, or to a church leader. She has called a parent of a friend that said it, and they now know you don't say it. Even if you're joking, you do not say that around Kira, because it's not a joke at our house. It's real.
When you learned on September 9th of, successful, in that attempt, what were the implications of that at that time for you? Because I've heard people describe that who have battled in marriage or parenting, that this long battle with suicide ideation ends up in a successful attempt, they often call it. They were successful in taking their life.
Yep.
What were the emotions of that? Because oftentimes most people think that there's incredible sadness, but it's coupled with lots of other emotions.
there's a lot of emotion in our house. So I was the one who had to tell my girls. And there's a lot of things that I've done that are really hard. There's a lot of things that I've lived through that are hard, and I don't ever want to experience those things again. I would do every single one of them 100 times over to never have to tell my girls that their dad died by suicide. And it's interesting because I remember it very differently than my girls do. I picture in my head, all I remember is standing in front of them saying, "Your dad is dead." That's how I remember it in my head. I remember the furniture they were sitting on, the way like our house, everything about it. And a few years ago, I was telling my girls, I'm like, I just have to tell you guys how sorry I am for the way I told you that your dad had died. They're like, what? So I said, it wasn't handled right, and I am so sorry. So they're like, what did you remember? So I told them, and they're like, whoa, that didn't happen that way at all. I'm like, what? Yeah, it did. We were sitting on the gray couch that was a semicircle, and it was facing the fireplace. They're like, we didn't have a gray semicircle couch, and it didn't face the fireplace. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? I still cannot. That's all I can remember. Like, my brain was off. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. And they're like, no, you sat us down. You put your arms around us. I'm like, okay, good. I did that. And you were crying. And I'm like, I was? Because I don't remember crying. They're like, yeah. And that's how we knew something really bad happened, because you didn't cry. I'm like, okay. They're like, and you said, I'm so sorry. Your dad's passed away. He took his own life. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it was really nice. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. So, but I don't remember it that way, because as soon as I found out, like, I hated him. I hated him. And I loved him so much. I loved him, and he was gone. There is no correcting, there is no fixing on this earth that can be done now. And I just pretty much sat there. And if you ask my girls, they are like, she kind of checked out for a while. And I did. I have amazing friends and family that surrounded me and did pretty much everything. And I remember certain parts of the next few months, but even up until the funeral, I remember parts of it. It's not what really happened. I've now since talked to a few people. I'm like, did this really happen this way? And they're like, nope, this is how it was. And I'm like, huh. Everything in my memory is really cold and calloused, and I had zero emotion, and I didn't do anything. And they're like, well, that's not quite how it was. And they would take me through that time. But it wasn't until, so that was September, and I woke up. Whenever I woke up, my girls got themselves to school, so I had a 5th grader and an 8th grader, and they got themselves breakfast, and they went to school. And luckily, we lived close enough to both the elementary and the junior high. And I'd get up, and I'm like, okay, I don't have any phone calls saying they're not in class, so guess they made it to school. And then they would get home from school, and I'm pretty sure we would watch movies until it was bedtime, and then that was what we did. And it's kind of weird because 2 miracles happened that are definitely not miracles, but they are to me. In January, I ended up getting influenza A and B and pneumonia. And I know how to deal with sickness. Like, that's easy. It was like, oh, okay. But I was so sick, and I could totally function as a sick mom. I didn't know how to be a grieving mom and a grieving wife mom. I didn't know how to do that, and I wasn't doing it well at all. But I could be a sick mom. I knew how, and so I was sick for about a month. That was in January. And I kind of came around because, I don't know, it kind of snapped me out of it. And then in March, I was driving and I was hit by a drunk driver. And that was crazy because my car was totally smashed the front and in the back. And I couldn't get out of my car and all my airbags were off. And there happened to be this off-duty fire paramedic guy that just happened to be right there at the accident. And like, I went to the emergency room and ended up having my stomach was from the airbag was shoved up into my chest cavity by my heart.
Wow.
My shoulder, so my clavicle, my collarbone was shoved into my shoulder. And then my shoulder had a tear and my bicep had a tear in it. Like, and so then over like the next 6 months, like I had 2 different surgeries, so much physical therapy, but it like snapped me out of, like I knew how to do those things. And it just kind of made life a little bit more normal to where I could actually function and take care of my kids. And so we ended up, back when my husband left, we had just sold our home because we were going to build a home. So we were living in my mom's basement apartment. So that's where I was at when things kind of started falling apart. And when we finally left, it was like, I'm at my mom's. I'm safe at my mom's. And he couldn't come in. And so that was our safe zone of sorts. But we had some friends and a bishop, so 2 different friends and a bishop that were like, hey, there's this family who needs someone to live in their house for 18 months. They have to go back to Washington. He was in the Secret Service and did all kinds of stuff. I don't know, did stuff. And he had to go back to Washington for something for 18 months and needed someone to live in their house. And so, like, total miracle, we got to live in their house. And it was amazing. And who gets to do that? And be back in the neighborhood where your kids are, that's where their friends are, that's where their school, so anyway, it was lots and lots of miracles. And then, this is kind of the callous part of it, but it's also the financial planning part of life, is we had life insurance on Dan. And it covered suicide. And we got that money, and I was able to buy a home. And when all of this is happening, like, you shouldn't make lots of big life decisions, but sometimes little miracles, big miracles kind of fall right in your lap to where you can't pass it up. And I didn't. And so I bought this home that just happened to have this amazing mother-in-law apartment in the basement, and I was half joking when I said it at first. And so I said to my mom, I said, any chance you want to sell your house and come move in with me? You can live in the apartment. You'll finally have a garage. You'll have a sprinkling system. And she's like, actually, I've been thinking about that. I think you might need a little bit of help right now. I'm like, I really need a lot of help, and I need my mom. And so she did. She sold her house of 44 years. It was paid off.
Wow.
She had a house, a yard. I mean, she still had to take care of the yard. And she did. She sold it, and she moved into my basement apartment. It's a really nice apartment, but it's still a basement. She doesn't have to do any yard work, but she's there, and she did that for me. And I could not have functioned without her. Like, as much as I use the word hate, like hate and love, you can't. I don't think you can hate somebody without really loving somebody too. Like, I think they're kind of, and I don't know this, but they're very strong emotions that kind of go hand in hand. And as much as I hated him, I still grieved him and what it should have been. All those plans that I had made, all those checked boxes that were left unchecked, never got done. And I grieved my future that should have been. I grieved my past that I wish it wouldn't have been. And I didn't function well. So thank heavens for moms.
Yeah. The complexity that you described of love and hate, I think, is a really interesting thing to talk about, briefly. When you now look back on those years of what was going on, even though your research and the internet and reading and trying to understand, like, who am I married to, what is going on, and having some of those light bulb moments, go off. In learning what was actually occurring in your mind, were you thinking, I'm still in this? I still can make this work. I still can fix it. I still can be Christ-like.
Mm-hmm.
Was that where your mind was going? And even hearing you describe, that even in that moment of, learning that he had died, by suicide, the compassion that you were kind of describing of you still loved him, because that's just human to love, even though you've been through so much struggle. So, I'm trying to understand just the complexity of that, because, I think I don't think many people have experienced, but I think that most people do understand what you were saying by, does it make sense you can't really love someone that much or hate someone that much unless you've loved them well. Talk about that a little bit more, just navigating the complexity of those feelings and how, because the trauma too, you described like mourning's heavy.
Yeah.
It took physical accidents and injuries to even get out of the weight of mourning. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, and I've learned a lot. And if anyone takes anything from this, go to therapy. I've learned so much that I just wish I would have known all the way along. But grief and mourning is so complex, and so many emotions. And one day I will be so angry that he chose to die by suicide, and just be like, why did you do that? You should have been here when our daughter graduated from high school. Darn it, why did you do this? And I'm so angry that he's not here. And the very next day I can be like, oh my gosh, I am so glad he is not here, because the damage that he was inflicting was massive and so big, and I couldn't get out. And then I can go to amazing memories, and I can miss him so much and be so sad that he is not here to remember those memories that were so good and so amazing. And I can run through all of those in a matter of minutes, or one thing can happen and I'm like, oh, wow. I haven't thought of that memory for so long, and I will instantly be so mad. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. And I haven't figured out how to make that stop. And apparently you can feel sad and miss somebody and be grateful that they are not here, all in the same space. And I didn't realize that. And so I've been learning that you can feel both of those, even at the same time. And that's weird to me because it's either, well, I thought you said you hated him. Mm-hmm. And I love him. Well, I thought you said he was mean. Yeah, he was. And he was so good. I don't know how to explain that except for that you can have both.
How many years has it been, Stacey?
7.
As I sit here and as I listen and as I think of some of the questions I asked, I'm a little embarrassed because I was trying to find this time in your story when you switched and you were over it and you were fixed, but as I'm hearing you talk, I mean, it's not fair for me to want that answer because of how complicated and complex our relationships are with one another, that it doesn't just get fixed.
No.
It doesn't just happen one day that you're over it, and I apologize for kind of asking maybe some of those questions, but it just is kind of a learning experience for me as I'm listening to you share. So.
The way you describe Stacey, having this emotion of, I'm so glad he's gone because of the pain he was inflicting. I tend to think about that as a husband, father of a daughter, all of those emotions of you just want people who inflict pain to be gone. And yet I've also heard, especially being in mental health, how many people who they hurt, so therefore they hurt.
Yes.
And that's such a complex thought pattern to think through. And especially in the culture, right? The Christian LDS culture, which is forgive, do your best to embrace other people. They're never too far gone. And yet those emotions of, I'm so glad that he's gone. And then immediately on the heels of that, feeling guilty that you're glad that he's gone.
Yeah.
And that's real.
It's real and it's confusing and it makes you feel like a terrible person until you can learn that it can be both. And one day, I hope I can think both and not feel bad that I think that. I'm glad he's gone, because then I'm saying, I'm glad my girl's dad is gone. And that's not what I want. I didn't want him to be gone. I wanted him to do better, to be better. I wanted him to get help. I wanted him to find help. I wanted him to want to find and get help. I wanted him to see what was really happening. And I couldn't do that. And I've also learned that it's not my job. It wasn't my job to fix him. It wasn't my job to force him. It wasn't. And it also wasn't my job to make excuses for him. But I did, and I do need to understand that hurt people hurt people. And he was hurt as a little kid. That sweet little boy did not deserve the home that he grew up in. He deserved 2 parents who loved him. He deserved not going to bed hungry. He deserved not having medical care withheld from him. He deserved to be loved and wanted. And he was hurt and he was wronged. But it didn't make his then choices, learned or otherwise, okay too. And it took me a long time to realize that it's okay to hold him accountable and not say, well, it's because you were hurt. That's why you hurt other people. It's not okay. He was old enough to know that that wasn't normal and to find out how to do it differently. And he wouldn't do it.
I've now spent 2 years building a mental health company with you. I've sat in many, many discussions. Your depth of wisdom, comes from, in my opinion, an incredible human that you are, but it also comes from that you have hours and miles and years of suffering in you. And you've chosen not to let the cycle continue, in your own life. But you also, in your journey of therapy, that has positioned you now to be running a mental health company.
Yep.
And there's something interesting about that. When we first sat down, you described that part of being, an owner of a mental health company, and part of sharing your story like this is therapy to you. And I know that it's therapy to people who come to Levo, because we get feedback often from people who say there is compassion at Levo like no other place they've been. And so as you think through those things, and now where you stand owning a mental health company with a few other, incredible people, has your suffer positioned you to sit with people in their suffering?
100%. I don't mind sitting with people who cry. I don't mind sitting with people and listening to why they're crying. And I am not a provider, and I don't sit and have appointments with these people, but it's hard to schedule those appointments because there's that stigma of, well, there's something wrong with me, so I've got to go get fixed. And a lot of times emotions run down your cheeks and people cry. And sometimes that can feel awkward because you don't know what to say or what to do. And I'm okay with saying, man, life sucks. It is hard today. I can see that it is hard for you today. I am sorry you're struggling. And I don't mind sitting there telling them, I'm sorry life sucks today. And I didn't know you could say things like that until I experienced that. And a lot of times people say, oh, just remember there's always a silver lining to every rain cloud. And that is so true. There are so many silver linings and so many miracles that come from the hard. But today's hard sucks. And it's okay to say that. And it's okay to be angry and to be mad, to be sad, and to be, I don't know, throw your temper tantrum. Let it just be that way. It is okay. But it's not okay to do it alone. And there's so much help out there. And at Levo, we have amazing providers who, they just get it. They know it. Yes, they've studied and done all the schooling, but they get it. They too also know it's okay to sit in the crappy for a minute and let your emotions fall.
Yeah.
No, we're not afraid of it.
The providers at Levo definitely also have that depth of compassion, because virtually every one of them, if you really sit with them, they have also sat and suffer in their own personal lives. And so they're equipped, right, to do that well. They're positioned that way.
Yeah.
You described earlier something that I think is so powerful. And you were describing that the stigma of being a man's man, or being, a man, and, they're not willing to go in and get help. Is it a fair statement to say that his unwillingness to go in and get help, he chose his maybe ego or arrogance or his stubbornness about being a man over causing pain to those that he loved around him?
Yes.
I mean, that sounds strong, but to our listeners, but is that really the decision,
Yes.
of ego and how other men are going to look at me, and even how I feel about myself being a strong man versus those that I love are going to face this, suffer, or the pain of this.
Right. Yeah. And you're right. It does sound strong, but it's the truth. And when you have your 10-year-old daughter come to you and say, why did dad choose to kill himself? And you say, well, and you try and make it sound a little prettier and a little nicer because she's 10. And I don't want to make life harder for my girls. And you try and make it sound pretty and you beat around the bush, and there's just nothing pretty about it. And it comes down to dad suffered with some mental health issues. Well, why didn't he go and get those fixed? Why didn't he go and work on it? He didn't want to. And my 16-year-old is literal. So she said, so dad didn't want to get fixed. He didn't want to work on it. And he wanted to die. So he chose that over me. I can't tell her she's wrong, even though that does sound strong. And yes, there is so much more to it than that very simplistic 10-year-old, literal, connect the dots. But he chose to not get help. And both my girls have actively been in therapy for, Kaya was 8 when she first started. And that was my first introduction to therapy, actually, was when we took our little 8-year-old who was suffering with severe anxiety. And then Kira started therapy at 7 because I was like, I need some help parenting this little wild child because she was so different than anything I knew. And as I went with them, I was like, oh, wow, I could use that skill. Oh, I could use that skill. And so then it was, well, if I go and you guys make us go, then why didn't dad choose to go? Because he chose that ego and he chose that stereotypical, I'm a man and I don't need help. It's kind of where he went with it.
Stacey, what would you say to the males that are struggling, that really don't want to go to therapy? Like, what would you tell them right now?
I would ask them how tired they are. They are carrying around so much stuff inside their head. They have got to be so tired. And I can't imagine that they are enjoying life. And I would ask them if they felt they were worth going to therapy. What is your wife? Are your kids? Is your mom? Is your dad? Is your sibling? Is your friend? Like, it will enhance every relationship in your circle by going to therapy and helping yourself. And if for no other reason, do it completely selfishly and do it for yourself because you're tired. Dan was tired of his mind. And that's my only experience that I have to compare it to for a man. All sisters, no dad. I only have girls. So I don't have a lot of male people in my life that I could compare that to. Dan was so tired, and it makes me so sad if somebody is struggling and suffering by themselves, thinking that they can't, shouldn't, or won't go get help. It is there. It is right there. Stop being tired.
The way I've now heard you say this a few times today, but also before, you framed it as fatigue, mental fatigue. And when I speak to my friends, men, that's how we tend to talk about it is, man, I'm just stressed. I'm so exhausted right now. Like life is, we call it heavy. We call it right pressure. That's how we internalize it. And I think that what you're describing is that there's a lot of expectations
So much.
on, I can see where Dan would say, I can't even have children. I belong to a faith and an organization who significantly rewards your ability to populate the earth, right? And so there's all of this weight and pressure of that and not being capable to do that. That's a giant, like speaking of list checking, I can't check that box. So I can see where at a young age, the insecurity on top of all of the abuse he endured is a recipe for being incredibly challenging to face a racing mind of expectations.
Yeah.
So, I love that you say it that way of tired, because at my lowest points of being a husband, father, a provider with all those expectations, the way that I would describe it to people is I'm exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true. There's a fatigue associated with all of this. And I have noticed in my own life that when the fatigue becomes too much, I revert back to my default coping. And you're only going to be able to utilize and draw on coping of the tools that you have.
Right.
When you think back, in those early years, whether in your 20s or in your 30s, what was the coping mechanisms that he drew on before it really spiraled downhill? I mean, you talked about he was funny, right? So it was a sense of humor that he could, if he got people laughing, he felt a shot of serotonin or oxytocin 100%. In his mind. So
100%. It was take nothing serious, make people laugh, and make sure everything looks perfect, like he has everything. Like he perfect. Like everything had to be perfect. And so if he was perfect and he was funny, all of that you just said, that was his. And spending money. That was his coping.
Yeah, spending gives an incredible shot of serotonin.
Oh, yeah.
It also says, I have stuff, so respect me.
Yes, it does.
And so that description that you're describing of humor or spending or travel or, the perception to the outward world, Preston, I'd be interested for you to kind of respond to this too. But if I really get core with myself about being a man, what do I want more than anything? To matter, to just respect. I want people to respect me. And if that happens, then I can kind of respect myself. Yeah. And that is language that goes back to when I can think, about it. I can think about sitting in church or sitting in different situations where words like duty, words like responsibility, take care of, and those are all great things.
They are.
But they're also heavy. There's a lot of pressure that's there. Yeah. Preston, would you say that too? Just respect, mattering?
Well, 100%. I mean, I think that's what we've discovered as we've started to do this, that ultimately that's the base of all of it. Yeah. That we're important, that we have value as we are.
Right. No matter what it costs. Yeah. And Dan's was stuff. Dan's look perfect, have the perfect home, have the perfect family, have the perfect job, have all the things. And that goes back to his childhood where things were withheld from him. He was neglected. He didn't have food sometimes not because they were poor, but because he didn't earn the food. He didn't have medical care at his disposal because his stepdad wouldn't take him to the doctors because he didn't make the right choice or something, so he wouldn't be able to go and get the medicine to help him get better. So he looked at things as, if I have things, then I'm important, because he had nothing and things were taken away from him. And so as a grown-up, nothing could be taken away from him because they were his. And it mattered. And he never, ever understood that none of that was what mattered. And I never was able to help him see that. I didn't know how to fix that. I wasn't the right person that could.
Well, I think you said it earlier that that's not your job.
No.
You know, and I think that that is a heavy part of being married and a spouse, is that you want so badly to be able to help someone solve that. And it isn't your job, you know, and there's no excuses for the behavior, you know, of what occurred. And I think that that's it. It's just complex.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's power in your story today, what you're doing, you know, the compassion that you have for other people, you know, from what has occurred in your own life. And I would love to hear you, if you are willing, you know, in closing this, you know, Preston and I, you know, Kevin Day, who's off camera, you know, picture us all as just brothers, men, you know, based on your experience. What advice would you give us to become better at living life?
I don't know what I would say in that context, but if I knew you were struggling with something, I would ask you to get help. And honestly, I don't know. I would tell you that you are important and that it's not your things and your stuff that make you a good person, a typical man in that stereotypical, that's not what it is. It's knowing how to treat somebody, knowing how to respect somebody, listening to what they need or want, learning how to control your emotions, knowing that hurting others is not being a man. And I would want you to know that. I'm a little bit afraid of men. I don't know what I would directly be able to say, because I've got stuff that I'm still working on, and I'm very careful when I say things to not say anything that may come across as offensive or belittling or that would hurt an ego.
Sure.
And so I don't know if I would be able to say a lot, but as a general, I would want those things.
Yeah.
You know, I appreciate what you said earlier when I asked a similar question about what would you tell a male figure that's struggling and like why they should go to therapy. And you summed it up in a way that is worth repeating. I think you said something along the lines of, do you value that relationship you have with your spouse or your wife or whoever? And if you do, you need to go to therapy. I mean, that's what I heard. And
Yes.
I appreciated you saying that. I think that's it brings it home for all of us that might be considering talking to somebody is, yes, we do. We truly do value those relationships, don't we? So
I hope so.
yeah.
And and I don't, it sounds too easy to just say that. And I know it's not easy to do that. And if I've got some friends who are like, hey, how do I get my spouse? How do I get my kid? How do I get my mom? They have to want it. And there's not a lot. Gosh, it's hard because sometimes the outside perspective you can see a little bit more, but it is hard if somebody is not willing.
Yeah.
I wish I had all the right words to say, and I don't.
You say enough, though, and I have to say this, part of asking the question is because your own example of being brave, of going to therapy and doing the work, one of the things that I have caught on to being in the mental health space personally is that I've heard men say the most manly and strong thing that I could do was to be brave enough to go to therapy so that I could stop the abuse in my lifetime. Instead of saying, well, that's what my dad did, and so that's what I'm going to do. That is probably the most ignorant mindset and stubborn mindset that I can fathom. And hearing and working with you and others, I started to recognize in my own life, and I had amazing parents, and my wife is amazing. But what I recognize in my own self is that I have blind spots, and the blind spots in my own life are perpetuated by ego and arrogance in my own way. And so me choosing to go to therapy was the result of sitting in meetings with you and other women. Frankly, women were much more the example than men in my life about a willingness to face the hard things and to really dive into, the dark, doors in my own mind. Yeah. And so I appreciate the example of women first in my life who have been willing to do personal work in their mental health. Liza started years and years ago, which is why she's now a therapist. That has made our life significantly greater of Liza being a mental health clinician. And those examples of all of those women, has helped me to be brave enough to say, why can't I just go do it?
Yeah.
And I can tell you, sitting with a therapist, it has significantly changed how I view certain events in my life. It has changed the negative outcomes of certain things. And so I can't say it enough. And I know that we're in the mental health business. And so people are going to say, well, obviously he's selling therapy.
Yeah.
That's not untrue. But the reason that we are in it is because it has made a significant difference in our own lives.
Yeah.
And so I have to thank you for your bravery of doing the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Because and I say this genuinely, I view you as a sister. And if one of my own sisters were to say to me, I have two of them, Julie and Kim, if they were to say, Tom, you really need to do therapy, it would change your life, I would listen. And they haven't said that to me, but you have, and others have said what a difference it's made. And it's made all the difference for me.
Yeah,
So thank you.
you're welcome. I am a firm believer in it. And not just therapy either. I am on medication because I have racing thoughts. Like I have past trauma. And I needed my mind to be calm. And so sometimes that is also a negative stigma with the mental health world, is the medication that you're going to be numb and you won't feel anything. I promise it's not the right medication then, because that's not real. Talk to somebody who has the knowledge and they can help you find the right medication, because you really can function as yourself and be on medication and be okay. And I don't love that stigma, and I don't love the stigma around mental health that, well, just get over it. Well, he's gone now, so no big deal. Now it's over. It follows you. Find the help and get the help. And find somebody you trust that can help you do it.
Stacey, thanks for being vulnerable today.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you sharing your story.
Thanks for letting me.
Happy to.
It's not that pretty, but it's mine.
You know, the whole premise of Brain Stoke is telling the stories of struggle and stoke. I don't think anybody would choose your struggle. Not one person.
I don't think so.
But we already know that you are stoking minds through what you're doing now, being a business owner, you know, being a woman leader in business, and doing it in a way where it's offering thousands of people compassion to sit and hurt. And I don't know that there is a better thing you could do with what you've faced than to love and lift other people. So thank you.
Thank you for letting me do this.
You've had your daily dose.